Good day. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington. Well, he was the most consequential Supreme Court justice of his generation and conservative thinker, influencing judges and lawyers throughout the country. Now his passing becomes the critical fault line in the presidential election, with shockwaves that could affect who wins the White House, who controls the Senate, and hot-button issues. Justice Scalia found Saturday morning on a Texas resort ranch, said to have died of an apparent heart attack. He would have turned 80 next month. His body was flown back home to Virginia, his casket arriving at Dulles Airport last night, draped in an American flag. The loss of this solidly conservative voice could easily change the balance on the court, where he was known for his wit, his passion, and his combative style, something he displayed from his very first oral argument 29 years ago. All of this sets up a huge political battle in the race for the White House. I'm joined now by NBC Justice correspondent, veteran court watcher Pete Williams. Pete, we can't overestimate the impact of Nino Scalia on his generation, his colleagues, on judicial thinking over these many decades.
Yes, in a couple of ways. Number one, he certainly enlivened oral argument, as you said, but he pushed the court toward getting away from this idea that was longstanding, that you could interpret a federal law by what the members of Congress meant, what their intent was. He scoffed at that. He said the only thing that matters is what's in the words of the statute. And he said, you know, these committee reports that come out of Congress, they're all written by teenagers anyway. So he was very critical of that idea, and I think the court has sort of come around to that.
You know, in just looking at some of the things that have been written about him, I was really struck by an article yesterday about how in his very first oral argument, Justice Powell leaned over to Thurgood Marshall because Scalia was asking so many questions.
Right.
And Justice Powell leans over to Thurgood Marshall and says, "Do you think he knows the rest of us are here?"
Well, and he continued that right up until his final oral argument on the court. He was always a very spirited person. Sometimes oral argument is a way that justices talk to each other. He sort of threw out softballs to the lawyers he was trying to favor to kind of help them, little lifelines to rescue them from where their argument was going and get them back on track. So he was a very energetic participant in oral argument.
The friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which I've witnessed personally at operas and at other social events in this town, that's been written about a lot. But what she said in her statement was that he influenced her thinking as well. It wasn't just that they shared New Year's Eve with her late husband, Marty Ginsburg, that they were, you know, two couples who vacationed together, who traveled together, who went to opera, but that she also listened to him.
I thought her statement was very touching, Andrea. She said we were best buddies. She certainly wrote her statement from the heart. But what she and several of the other justices said was, our opinions when we were in the majority and he was dissenting were always better because of the weaknesses he pointed out in our dissents. He forced us to be better.
That said, he was also criticized by some for the patronizing way that he took after Sandra Day O'Connor and some of her important decisions.
He once said that an argument that Sandra Day O'Connor made in a majority opinion can't be taken seriously. And he always said that those remarks he didn't think stung because people would be equal opportunity zingers, as he once said to me in an interview, that they would give it right back. But I suspect that sometimes those barbs did wound a little bit.
Now, when we think about the court without him, so right now the court is tied at 4-4. Any decision that he participated in oral argument,
right,
cannot be, if it is tied, cannot stand.
His vote won't count in decisions that have already been that are in the process. The case has been argued, the court has taken an initial vote, and they're working on the opinion now. So his votes won't count. If there are any cases where he cast the deciding vote, then that could potentially lead to a tie on those. And of course, we may have 4-4 ties coming up if there are only 8 justices left on questions that would normally be 5-4. And then the court faces a choice. Really, they have 3 choices. They can issue a decision that's a tie, which has the effect of having no power whatsoever. It basically affirms the lower court decision. Whoever won below would still win. Or the court could say, you know what, we're going to order this case to be re-argued for the next term. And they may do that. They may do that quite a bit. They can just sort of put these cases on the shelf and pull them down when the time comes. If that happens, then you'd see a couple of consequences. President Obama would, his own only chance to go ahead and enforce his new immigration policy was if the Supreme Court were to overturn the lower courts that have put it on hold. That now doesn't seem very likely. Also, this big, tough abortion law out of Texas, the court may leave that in place. So it casts a big cloud of uncertainty over the rest of this term.
And Ted Cruz right now, who's a member of the Judiciary Committee, is in South Carolina and talking about Scalia. Let's listen for a moment.
The nomination made in an election year, and now is no year to start. This is for the people to decide. I intend to make 2016 a referendum on the U.S. Supreme Court.
So Ted Cruz saying that he's going to make this a referendum on the Supreme Court. Thanks to you, Pete Williams, for teeing this all up. I'm joined now by the top Democrat, former Judiciary Chairman, Patrick Leahy, joining us from Burlington, Vermont. Senator, well, you've heard our conversation and a little bit off mic, although it was, of Ted Cruz, but I think you know where Ted Cruz stands on this. The fact is that before the court had even announced that Justice Scalia had died, it had been announced by the Texas governor and commented on by Ted Cruz. But Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, majority leader, came out and said there will be no action, which means, I assume, no committee action on a nominee and no vote.
Well, actually, what Senator McConnell and all the people, the huge number of candidates who were in the debate the other night, they're talking from a Republican playbook. I think we ought to talk about this, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States says the president shall nominate justices to the Supreme Court, and then the Senate can vote, advise, and consent. It would be the height of irresponsibility for the Republican leadership not to have a vote on a nominee from the president. We have had numerous times in our history that there's been a confirmation of a justice in the final year of a presidency. Most recently, when President Reagan, the Democrats were in charge, President Reagan's nominee was voted on in the last year of his presidency, and we kept it out of politics. I believe it went through unanimously.
But that was Tony Kennedy, he was nominated in 87 and confirmed in 88. So it arguably was a longer lead time.
But he had, it's basically the same thing, because if the Democrats had run the kind of attitude the Republicans are, he never would have had a vote. Instead, we voted him through unanimously. This country has not gone with a year-long vacancy on the Supreme Court since the Civil War. Yet we've had numerous vacancies filled in the final year of a president's term, beginning, of course, the first time with President Washington, but with Republican and Democratic presidents since. It would be the height of irresponsibility. It would, and it's not as though we don't have time. The Republicans have set more recesses this year than I've ever seen in my years in the Senate. Cancel a couple of those. Bring us back. We get paid the same whether we're there or not. Bring us back. Let us do our job and vote on a nominee. What kind of an impression do you think we are giving to the rest of the world when our federal judiciary, which is usually held up as the gold standard for the whole world, is suddenly thrust into such politics? I can't say, I don't think the late Justice Scalia would want to see that. It is wrong. It is not responsible. It's beneath our country. It's beneath the United States Senate.
Would you be arguing it the other way if it were a Republican president and a Republican Senate holding up on a potential Democratic nominee and the balance of the court was
You mean a Republican president with a Democratic Senate?
With a Democratic Senate. And
Well, I've been there with that situation. The president was named Ronald Reagan. The Democrats were in the majority. And in the last year of his presidency, we put his nominee through, and that nominee could have been very much the balance of the court. I mean, the fact is, I think of all the leaders I've known in the Senate since I came there, Hugh Scott for the Republicans, Mike Mance for the Democrats, I have never heard any Republican or Democratic leader of the Senate suggest doing something like this. It's unprecedented. It's pure politics, and the Supreme Court of all places should not be tied up in politics. And then they talk about what's the responsibility of the president. Remember, President Obama was elected. He was elected twice, the last time with a 5 million vote plurality. That's kind of, and everybody knew in voting for him, he might be nominating members of the Supreme Court. I don't see a Ted Cruz getting this 5 million vote plurality. President Obama did. And that's a plurality to do his job. And I commend the president for wanting to do his job.
Now let's go behind the scenes, pull back the curtain a bit. So you're in the White House, let's say you're the White House counsel. There are a number of people who have been named who were unanimously approved for the D.C. circuit. Within the last couple of years, they have stellar records. One even worked for George W. Bush's White House. Would that be top of mind to present someone who would be so universally admired that it would be hard for Republicans in the Senate to not back down from this demand?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that would fit that bill. Now, whether they will be responsible in this or not, I'm going to be talking with the president when I'm in Vermont now. I'll be going back. He'll be coming back from the conference he has, the Asian conference now, and we will sit down and talk about it. I'll suggest some names, but he's got some names already in mind, and it's finally, in the final analysis, it's his decision. But keep in mind, not since the Civil War has this country gone a year without a full membership on the Supreme Court. And of course, that was because of the Civil War that we didn't. We've come a long way in the United States of America since the Civil War. Let's not go back to that precedent. It makes no sense.
What would be some names that might come to mind?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'll be sure to tell some of them to the president.
I thought that would be the answer. Senator Leahy, as always, thank you so much. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for being with us.
Good talking with you.